It's been around for since 2007. And today I'm going to talk about the kind of history of what happened, and we'll talk about the area a bit, and then the organization of how we organize the GMRS and ham pieces. Talk about the radio, because that is actually one of the critical pieces. And then what we do for training and what we do for practice. So the history, we are three coastal, isolated, small communities. And we're subject to lots of winter storms, ice storms, wildfires, unfortunately, landslides, Cascadia. We've got a pretty sizable tsunami inundation area.
No.
And we also have tornadoes, which we had a water spout come on shore back in 2016, I think it was, and went right through the middle of town. And it was funny. That was something nobody ever practiced for. So it was quite the experience. I think it damaged, there were no injuries or anything. It damaged about 100 homes. If you go on YouTube and you look at Manzanita tornado, you can see a video that one person took from one of the overlooks, and you can see the water spout going right through town and transformers blowing up and all that stuff. It was pretty exciting. But back in 2007, we had a winter storm, a big one. And the area was a week without power or any communications at all, other than some ham activity. In fact, it was the hams that got the data out to the governor so that they could declare a state of emergency, and eventually got some help in for us. But we were really, really isolated, and it was quite a mess. And what was interesting is that we had an EOC in town at the fire station, and it was staffed by the fire chief by himself. Yet within a block, there were dozens of people who wanted to help. So basically the community said, "Oh, we can't go through this again. We really have to get together and do something." So today, on the communication side of things, we've got almost 300 trained GMRS users. There's about 60 hams in the area. We've got 2 ham. We've got 2 GMRS repeaters. We've got a relationship with the local FM broadcast translator, where we've got access to their station and we can make emergency announcements. We've got weekly joint nets, GMRS and ham joint nets, and we do between 2 and 4 and sometimes 6 exercises a year. So we went from 0 to this in basically 15 years. So what were the success factors? So we think that's pretty successful. I mean, there are 300 trained GMRS people is pretty amazing. So these are the main ones. One is that the preparedness people. So we have what some people call map your neighborhood. We call it prepare your neighborhood here. So it's a group of people that focus on making sure the populace is prepared, and they have a cult. Their culture reinforces the importance of communications. So when we do exercises, our after action reports rarely complain about communications, which is that's usually the first thing everybody complains about. And it's because the preparedness people, it's part of the culture to reinforce the importance of communications. We standardized on a radio for the GMRS people, which we'll talk about. And in order to get a radio, you had to go through a 2-hour training session, which ends up, it kind of teaches how to use it and all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about the training. And from day one, we were fully integrated with the hams. So we'll talk about what that integration looks like. But it was we don't think of GMRS as kind of over there. They're part of our communications infrastructure in the area. And then I mentioned we have weekly nets. We'll talk about how we do that, which are coordinated. In fact, I'm missing our ham net tonight, so I already checked into the my GMRS net, but I haven't. We're talking on my ham time, and then we do joint exercises. So here's the area. Here's Portland, Columbia River. So we're this little bump over here in the what we call the North Oregon coast. It's the Tillamook Bay where the estuary of the Tillamook River comes in. So there's 3 towns, which are Manzanita, Nehalem, and Wheeler. Those are the main towns. There's 1,500 people, full-time residents, but we get inundated. Lots of Washington people down here. We get inundated with lots of people in the summer, easily 5,000 in the area. So they kind of overwhelm the place sometimes. So topologically, we've got a valley, we've got the Coast Range mountains, we've got this, we've got very few. This looks like a lot of roads in and out, but there aren't, and they all have bridges that are not seismically good bridges. So if the big earthquake happens, there's these 3 towns will be isolated, and then we'll be isolated from the up and down the coast, of course, and the inland. So that's a little bit about the area. Now the organization, what we did was we split up the communities into what we call zones. And a zone is based on primarily radio topology. So each one of these zones, we know that people, primarily GMRS users, can talk to each other, can hear everybody in the zone on simplex with a handheld. We also adjust the zones a little bit based on kind of mutual assistance, that we know that certain places have capabilities, and so we include them in a zone that maybe doesn't have capabilities. But primarily, the zone is a topology thing for GMRS simplex. Each one of the zones has a dedicated GMRS channel. It's a simplex channel. And each zone has a net control, a trained net control. And each zone has at least one zone ham. Some of these zones have, a dozen or so hams, but there's designated zone hams. And then each of the zones has what we call a solar radio go box, which is I should grab mine. It's just a ammo can thing with a battery and a radio and a WinLink modem. And we've got with solar panels and a solar charger and a portable antenna and that kind of stuff. I think I've got a picture of one later. But the idea for that is that it's a deployable station that has a little more power than a handheld. And so, and they cover GMRS frequency channels. Now, kind of on top of that is what we call clusters, which are basically neighborhoods. And there's a they are made up of full and part-time residents, and they're kind of smallish in size. You can kind of maybe see that there's some map, like I think zone one, which is that upper left-hand area. They've got like 4 clusters in that zone, and uh, they have established leadership. They do all sorts of preparedness training and preparedness classes and things like that. So there's an established kind of block captain leadership in there. And they each have a neighborhood, what we call a neighborhood gathering site, which is a location that's outside the tsunami zone that has a supply cache there, so people can evacuate up to that in the event of a Cascadia. And these are unsigned locations. So the idea that these are locations for the residents, and if we have visitors, they're handled differently. So we kind of make a distinction between the residents and the visitors. And the visitors, they're mostly staying in the tsunami area because they want to be close to the beach and the views are better and all that kind of stuff. And we know that they're like totally unprepared um, from a disaster standpoint. So we assume that. And so for them, we have 4 assembly sites that they would evacuate to. And so these are the ones that say, have a tsunami warning sign and evacuation arrows and stuff. And there's all of those all over the area. And these assembly sites are managed by our CERT leadership team. So we assume that there's going to have to be some organization at these things, and they do that. And they also have the CERT people are radio people as well. And we're currently working on caches for these, getting funding. Each of the municipalities they're responsible for taking care of the visitors. And so they're working on getting funding for caches and shelters and stuff like that. We've defined what they need, and they're working on getting grants and stuff to do it. And then in terms of infrastructure, general infrastructure, each of the 3 communities has an EOC, an Emergency Operations Center, which in some cases is a table in the city hall. But at least, and each of the EOCs has a VHF, UHF base station stuff. We have 3 shelters that are like Red Cross kind of shelters. We have 2 medical clinics. We have 2 MRC, which is Medical Reserve Corps trailers. That's for they're retired, primarily professional medical people who've retired, yet they form a group that can support all sorts of different things. And they have 2 trailers for doing things, stocked with medical things. We have 1 fire station, we have a school, and we have a mass care group that once you get beyond the earthquakes and the tsunami and stuff, and you need to worry about, okay, we got to help people for longer term, that we've got mass care stuff available for that. So now we talk about this integration of GMRS and ham. So within a zone, I mentioned how we've got clusters. And so each cluster has a neighborhood gathering site, and there's at least 1 radio lead. And I might slip up and call them yellow radios because that's the color of the radio that we use. And they don't call them GMRS, they call them yellow radios. And so each cluster has a yellow radio lead. So here's two clusters. The assembly areas have a yellow radio lead. And then there's a zone net control team of a yellow radio person and a ham. So the gray radios are hams, basically. And sometimes it's the same person, but most of the time it's two people. And so within a zone, this constitutes how they all communicate. So it's basically via GMRS. Now, when you need to go from zone to zone, so we've got 3 different zones shown here. The zones communicate via the hams. So we have a ham net control, typically on one of the ham repeaters, but we practice using simplex for this too. So any intrazone things go via the hams. And then there's a ham at each one of the EOCs in the radio room there. And so that's how we can get it into the emergency managers for each one of those things. So the previous slide is for like little tiny problems that are just zone related problems. So you'll see that kind of thing spin up whenever there's a power outage or some road gets blocked or something. And if it's a little bit bigger of an situation, then this comes into play. So it's still within the area, but we're using both GMRS and ham. And then if something big happens, we have that same organization, but now we've got hams at each one of the shelters and hams at each of the EOCs. And the CERT supervisor, there's a ham for that. The MRC supervisor, there's a ham. And the fire guys, they have a ham. And then they can all communicate to the Tillamook County EOC, which is 30 miles away in Tillamook, not too far from the cheese factory if you've visited down there. And so there's a ham in that place. So that's the kind of organizational structure. And we practice all the time sending information up and down this these different ones from within the zone to the just locally to countywide. So this is a map showing the 272 GMRS users in the area. And you can kind of see it's a pretty good exposure of coverage of the area. And so we're able to get situation reports and things like that from the areas up to emergency management pretty quickly, because we don't really have to deploy a lot of people out. They can look out their window or walk down the street to get what we need. Okay, so that was the organization. Now the radio. And for better or worse, this is the radio we standardized on, the GMRS V2. V1, now we're using the V2s. And the reason we picked this one was luckily we don't have a big desense problem, or we're rural, so we're not worried about a lot of interference things. But mostly it was because it covers UHF and VHF. I mean, even though it's a GMRS radio, it does receive both UHF and VHF frequencies. We program the radio. So we buy the radios, we program them, and then we sell them to the users basically at cost. we encouraged hams to get the equivalent radio, and we program both of them with overlapping channel templates. So when we tell somebody to go to channel 102, we know that everybody knows what 102 is, and they can both get there. And of course, all the accessories are similar, so that makes it easier for switching things around. So these are the kind of accessories that a lot of people get: the battery eliminator, the big battery eliminator, speaker mics, mobile antennas. I don't have the the base station antennas on here. Gang chargers. A lot of I mentioned that these neighborhood gathering sites have a shed, and a lot of them now have put solar on the shed, and they've got a battery in there, and that they provide the service of charging their radios and cell phones and all that kind of stuff, and they use these gang chargers to charge them all at once, which was a good idea. Okay, so that's the radio. The 2-hour basic training. So this is what is covered in the 2 hours. There's radio basics. How do you turn it on and navigate, and what do all the symbols mean on the screen, and all that kind of stuff. Then we spend a lot of time talking about etiquette and how you talk on the radio, and what are the magic words you use, like over and out and affirmative and negative and stuff. You'll see a few more of those later. We do the phonetic alphabet, and we always run an exercise as part of that training. So we get people right off the bat talking on the radio. And then we spend another fair amount of time talking about operating on a net, because that's usually what the environment we're in. Checking in, what is, when doubling happens, what does that mean? What does it sound like? What do you do about it? How do you relay if somebody's having trouble getting in? Checking out of the net when you're done. And we run an exercise here too, which is checking in and out of a net and relaying information. And as I mentioned, we hand out their radios at the start of the class, and then we use them throughout the class. So we get that part. And we talk about troubleshooting, and we break up troubleshooting in these 3 buckets: the I'm not hearing anything, or I'm not hearing what I expect, or nobody's hearing me. And so we talk about how do you figure out which, techniques you can do to figure out which one of those is going on. We talk about radio care and feeding. How do you leave it on a charger? How do you handle charging and spare batteries and all that kind of stuff? And I mentioned accessories, and the channel card I'll show you in just a second. And I'll make sure that you guys get a copy of the presentation, and if I've got a link here to the training presentation. So if you're interested in the actual slides we use, you can try them on. You can download those. So as part of the training, we hand out this channel card, which is on both sides of a 5x7 waterproof, stiff card, and it gives what the channel, our channel template is. And you'll notice that we've got ham frequencies in there, public service frequencies, marine frequencies and stuff. Everything in red is no transmit. You can only listen. And then everything in green is what they can transmit on. So you can see our different zone channels, and we have some ops channels that we've reserved for like operating within a shelter and stuff like that. And then there's a number of other communities around us that have kind of started doing this same thing. And so they've got some repeaters, GMRS repeaters. And so we include them in here. So in case people are traveling, they can, and something happens, they can access that. So this is an old channel template. So it's a little bit different now, but this is the basic idea. We have phonetics on there in case they forget. We have a map on zones so they know what zone they're in at any particular time. If they're out driving around, they can know where they are. And so because they know where they are zone wise, they know what channel they should be using if something happens. And then here's some of the magic words from that. And then ongoing training. So we make the assumption that the GMRS people are going to have to know message handling just like the hams usually do. And so we've kind of taken a subset of the kind of messages that they might run into, and we do training and exercises and stuff from those. So you can we've done a couple of YouTube videos. So this is the view of our community from up on the overlook. So that's Manzanita, like our house is right down there. And we also use a line message protocol, which if there's ad hoc information that emergency management needs, like, and it isn't like part of a normal form, like a normal ICS form, they're able to define a form. And here's one that we use for one of our exercises. And the emergency management people can create the form, and then it gets kind of conveyed conveyed down the chain to the GMRS people, and they know how to like take a blank form and fill it in with, okay, on line 1 it says community name, so they know that that's where the community name is, and then they can go out and gather the information and send the information up and stuff. It's a very efficient way to do it, and it gives us a lot of flexibility in what kind of information we want to gather at any particular time. And we use this, you might not be able to read it, but it says it's the 2023 Great Shakeout. So that's a big countywide thing for us. And we were just prepping for it some today, and we're going to be doing the same kind of deal this year. And then this is the Solar Radio Go box with the orange radio box, and it's got WinLink in it. It's got a WinLink modem. So there's a laptop, and there's an external antenna on a tripod, and solar panel to charge battery. And each box has 2 batteries and stuff like that. So let's see. So that's all the kind of ongoing training. And then practice. So as I mentioned, we have a GMRS net. There's a weekly one, which it's Thursdays at 6 o'clock. So I checked in right as we were doing right before this, and we started on the GMRS repeater, and we do announcements, and we have what we call the educational moment. So every week we have a topic that's about 1 or 2 minutes topic that the net control for the repeater, it's usually them, reads this educational moment. And we've got over 35 topics in the library, and we kind of rotate through, or like, this month is National Preparedness Month. So there's a bunch of national preparedness things that we do that we talk about as part of that. And so it's not just a check-in net and check out. It's got some meat to it, I guess. And then a lot of the time we have a drill where we're asking the users, the GMRS users, to do something. And sometimes it's, kind of trivial things like, go out on your street and count how many red cars there are. And uh, they could be things like that, or more substantial things. And then, so we're on the repeater still here. The net control will say, okay, and today's drill is go out on the street and count how many red cars on your street. And then they say, now it's time to switch to your zone channel for check-ins and for the drill. So everybody goes off the repeater channel and they go to their zone channels. And so there's 7 nets going on at once down there, for one for each of the zones. A couple of the zones are combined for this. And the zone net control takes check-ins, and the check-ins give the number of red cars on the street as part of their check-in. And so then so they take all the check-ins, and then the zone ham gets the total number of check-ins, the number, and then gets a summary of the drill in terms of how many red cars. And they're going to then pass that information up to the ham net, which I'll get to on the next slide. So it's taking information from in the zones, and we're going to pass it up the chain. We mix things up every month or so. Sometimes we'll take all the check-ins on the repeater. There can be a lot of check-ins, so it's takes a while. That's kind of why we've got, when you have 300 or almost 300 potential check-ins, it could take a long time. So that's why we divvy it up into 7 zones, basically. And we also do a repeater down exercise where the people tune into the repeater channel and there's nothing there. Well, their standard operating procedure is, if you don't hear anything on channel 119, the repeater, you go right to your zone channel and start things going there. So we practice that as well. So that's the GMRS nets. The ham nets, there's a local ham net, which is the one I'm missing. And the ham net control takes the check-ins from the zone hams with the counts and the summary and stuff, and that all gets saved. And then they take regular check-ins, just like a regular net does. And just like on the GMRS side, we sometimes make believe the repeater's down and we have to use simplex, or we'll switch to our secondary or tertiary repeater and operate from there just to make sure that thing's running. We also have a county-wide net that's at 7 o'clock, so I could be checking into that too. Although the county-wide net is on a repeater that's far enough away from us, Tillamook County is a really big county, very long along the coast, and most of the hams in our area can't reach the main emergency repeater in the rest of the county. So that's kind of why we have our own stuff. And then everybody, the zone people and the ham people, they pass all the check-in information to a coordinator. And we've got data from 2016. So here's the data. The red line is the number of check-ins for GMRS, and the blue line is the number of check-ins for hams. And I mentioned that we have a lot of full and part-time people. We have a lot of part-time people, and so that it's, if I did the total number of check-ins, it's more in the course of a year. about 2/3 of the total people are checking in at least a few times in that year. But on a week to week basis, it kind of evens out. And then practice for exercises and stuff. There's three major ones that we've done that we do. One is this food can tsunami, we call it. So we have a local food bank, and we concocted this exercise that we're going to tsunami the food bank with cans, donations. And basically, we have part of our prep is that we encourage everybody to have a go bag. And so what we have people do in this exercise is empty out their go bag and check for, expiration dates and stuff, on which, people need to do that every once in a while. And then they fill their go bag up with can donations and checks. The food bank really likes checks. And then they evacuate to their neighborhood gathering site or assembly area. And so they actually take their can up to the assembly site or neighborhood gathering site, or their go bag up. And then there's GMRS people at each of the leads at each of those sites, and they report that into the zone net control. And then that gets transferred to the zone ham. And then when those sites are ready, they'll call in via the zone ham, and the zone ham, we've got mobile hams driving, around the area, and they'll say, oh, so-and-so gathering site is ready for their pickup. And they'll coordinate with the mobile ham to go grab the donations and take them to the food bank. And so it's a once a year kind of thing, and it takes 3 hours, and I don't have the numbers, but it raises a lot of money and a lot of donations for the local food bank. So it's a great community organization thing. We've got the great shakeout. It's a countywide thing, so we do our little part, but the rest of the county is also doing the same thing, and on kind of a smaller scale, because they're not quite spun up on as a big a thing as we have, although they're getting there. And we use WinLink for that, to get the data up to the emergency manager in Tillamook. And then we've got so a lot of these exercises focus on getting the information up to the emergency manager. And this, what we call get a clue exercise, gets information from the emergency manager down to the organization. And so we came up with this idea that there's a crime wave. Each zone is having a crime wave, and the emergency manager has the clues, and we use 3 different vehicles to get the different clues down to the zone. So we have our KQMI, which is our FM broadcast stuff. They give us we're allowed to use their translator for a couple of hours, and one of the clues comes from the emergency manager to the EOC ham, to the local EOC ham, to the zone ham, and then the zone ham tells the zone people what that clue is. And then we also have zone channels where they get their own clue, and then the repeater gives another clue. And if you remember the game, there's who, what, and where, which room. And then we use a Google form that all the participants fill out this Google form to demonstrate that they've solved it correctly. And so it's a fun way to get stuff down the chain as opposed to up the chain. So that's it. The link has got or or the slides got the EVCNB website, and then there's a Yellow Radio website, and there's a ham website as part of that, and you can see all the presentations that we do and the trainings and the check-ins and all that kind of stuff.